Dr. Kim Ji-won's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the polished floor of his laboratory aboard the Galactic Research Station Aurora. The steaming liquid pooled around the broken ceramic as he stared at the holographic message floating above his desk. The words seemed to pulse with an ominous glow against the star-filled backdrop, visible through the massive observation windows. Emergency assignment, xenobiological care required. Classification, apex predator. Species, Krythak. Age, juvenile. Duration, indefinite. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the datapad containing the full briefing. The Aurora was humanity's most advanced research facility, positioned at the edge of the Andromeda trade routes, where dozens of alien species conducted their daily business. But this assignment was unlike anything they had ever handled. The laboratory door hissed open behind him, and Commander Park Min-ho stepped inside, his usually composed demeanor cracked with visible tension. The commander's military uniform bore fresh stress wrinkles, and his dark eyes held the weight of someone who had spent the last several hours dealing with panicked crew members. "I know what you're thinking, Ji-won," Min-ho said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded deep space missions for over 2 decades. "But you're literally the only person in this sector qualified for this job. Your doctoral work on predator species psychology, your experience with hostile alien juveniles, and frankly, your unusual talent for remaining calm under pressure make you our only option." Ji-won scrolled through the briefing files, his scientific mind absorbing the terrifying details. The Krythak were legendary throughout the galaxy, creatures so perfectly evolved for hunting that entire civilizations had fallen to their adult forms. Their home planet Krythera was a death world, where even the plants had developed carnivorous tendencies. No Krythak had ever been successfully studied by alien scientists because none had ever survived the encounter. The Guardian was injured during a cargo ship accident near the Proxima station. Min-ho continued, pacing across the laboratory floor. "Some kind of engine explosion. The adult Krythak, called Vexhar, is in critical condition in their medical bay. They can't wake up for at least 3 months, maybe longer. The youngling has been alone for 6 days now, and it's starting to show signs of distress." The datapad displayed a series of surveillance images that made Ji-won's breath catch in his throat. The creature was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were: sleek black scales that seemed to absorb light, golden eyes that burned with intelligence, and a serpentine grace that spoke of millions of years of evolutionary perfection. But there was something else in those images, something that his trained eye caught immediately. "It's scared," Ji-won whispered, zooming in on one particular image where the youngling had curled itself into a tight ball in the corner of its containment unit. "Scared?" Min-ho's eyebrows shot up. "Ji-won, this thing is already 2 meters long, and its claws can cut through titanium. Yesterday it destroyed 3 security drones that got too close to its enclosure." But Ji-won was already moving, gathering his equipment from various drawers and cabinets around the laboratory. His xenobiology kit contained specialized sensors, translation devices, and most importantly, the neural interface headband that would allow him to monitor the creature's emotional state in real time. "When does the transport arrive?" he asked, slipping the headband into his equipment bag. 15 minutes, Min-ho replied. "But Ji-won, I need you to understand something. The Galactic Council is watching this situation very closely. If something goes wrong, if anyone gets hurt, it won't just be your career on the line. Humanity's reputation in the galactic community is still fragile. We can't afford to mess this up." Through the laboratory's observation windows, Ji-won could see the sleek form of a Centaurian transport ship approaching their docking bay. Its hull gleamed silver against the cosmic backdrop, and he could make out the distinctive blue energy signatures of its containment systems. Somewhere inside that ship was a creature that could grow up to become one of the galaxy's most feared predators. As he sealed his equipment bag and headed toward the door, Ji-won felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. This was why he had left Earth's comfortable research facilities to work on the frontier. This was the moment every xenobiologist dreamed of: first contact with a species that had never been studied before. The transport ship's docking clamps engaged with a resonant clang that echoed through the station's corridors. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the Aurora, As crew members hurried to their assigned positions, G1 could hear the nervous chatter of technicians and security personnel as they prepared for the most dangerous cargo transfer in the station's history. But, as he walked toward the docking bay, G1 couldn't shake the image of those golden eyes from his mind. Behind all that evolutionary perfection, behind the deadly claws and armored scales, he had seen something unmistakably vulnerable. Something that reminded him of every lost animal he had ever helped during his years of research. The creature waiting for him wasn't just a predator. It was a child, alone and afraid in a universe that suddenly made no sense. The first thing G1 noticed was the silence. For 3 weeks now, Kai's massive paws made absolutely no sound as they moved across the Aurora's metal corridors. The young Krythak had somehow learned to retract tiny sound-dampening membranes between its toe pads, a hunting adaptation that should have terrified everyone on the station. Instead, G1 found it oddly comforting to have his silent shadow following him from lab to lab. "Morning rounds, buddy," G1 would say each day, and Kai's golden eyes would brighten with what he could only describe as anticipation. The creature had grown noticeably in just 3 weeks, now standing as tall as G1's waist when on all fours. Its midnight scales had developed an iridescent quality that shifted between deep blue and purple under the station's artificial lighting. "Doctor." Lee Sermon couldn't hide her amazement during their weekly observation sessions. She would stand behind the reinforced viewing window of Lab 7, tablet in hand, documenting behaviors that contradicted everything they knew about Krythak psychology. "Look at this footage from yesterday," she said, projecting holographic recordings into the air between them. The images showed Kai carefully organizing G1's research tools, placing each instrument in precise order by size and function. "It's learning your routines, anticipating your needs. This level of cooperative behavior has never been recorded in any predator species, let alone one as naturally solitary as the Krythak." But G1 was more interested in the subtle changes he observed during their daily interactions. When he worked late analyzing mineral samples from the Vega system, Kai would position itself near the laboratory entrance, those keen golden eyes scanning the corridor for any potential threats. The young predator's protective instincts were clearly developing, but instead of guarding territory or resources, it was guarding him. The breakthrough moment came during the 3rd week, in the depths of the station's night cycle, when most of the crew was asleep. G1 had been awakened by sounds he had never heard before, a series of low, mournful calls that seemed to vibrate through the Aurora's hull. The station's AI system immediately went into alert mode, emergency lighting bathing the corridors. "In amber warnings. Unknown vocalizations detected in Xenobiology Wing," the AI announced in its calm, synthetic voice. "All personnel maintain safe distance from containment areas." But G1 was already running through the corridors, his bare feet slapping against the cold metal floors. He knew those sounds weren't aggressive displays or hunting calls. They were the cries of something in distress, something afraid and alone in the darkness. He found Kai in the center of its expanded living quarters, a spacious area that the engineering team had modified to accommodate the creature's rapid growth. The young Krythak was curled into a tight spiral, its serpentine tail wrapped around its body like a protective barrier, but its head was thrown back, and those haunting calls continued to pour from its throat. "Hey, hey, it's okay," G1 whispered, slowly approaching the distressed creature. He had left his translation device in his quarters, so he switched to Korean, the language that felt most natural when he wanted to comfort someone. "Gwenchana, Gwenchana. Everything's going to be fine." Kai's golden eyes snapped open, fixing on Ji-won with an intensity that might have been frightening, if not for the obvious relief that flooded through them. The creature's calls gradually softened into something that almost sounded like whimpering. Without thinking about safety protocols or the potential danger, Ji-won sat down on the floor next to the massive predator. Kai's scales were surprisingly warm to the touch, and he could feel the rapid beating of the creature's heart beginning to slow as he gently stroked the smooth surface of its neck. "Was it a bad dream?" he asked softly, continuing to speak in Korean. "I used to have those too, when I was little. My mom would sit with me just like this until I felt better." The station's emergency lighting gradually returned to normal as Kai's distress calls ceased entirely. The young Krythak shifted its position, carefully maneuvering its bulk so that it could rest its massive head against Jiwon's shoulder. The mate's gesture was so trusting, so completely vulnerable, that Jiwon felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. They stayed that way for hours, human and alien finding comfort in each other's presence, while the stars wheeled slowly past the station's viewports. Jiwon dozed fitfully, waking periodically to find Kai's golden eyes watching him, with something that looked remarkably like gratitude. From that night forward, their relationship fundamentally changed. Kai began sleeping in the corner of Jiwon's laboratory rather than returning to its designated quarters. The creature would wait patiently while Jiwon conducted his research, occasionally bringing him tools or samples with the precision of a trained assistant. During meal times in the station's cafeteria, Kai would position itself under Jiwon's table, a living shadow that caused other crew members to give them a wide berth. But Jiwon noticed that the fear in their eyes was gradually being replaced by curiosity and even a grudging admiration. "It's like having the galaxy's most dangerous service animal," Engineering Chief Park Sun-ho commented one day, watching as Kai carefully carried a box of delicate equipment across the laboratory without damaging a single component. The young Krythak had also developed what could only be described as a sense of humor. It would hide behind laboratory equipment and pounce playfully when Jiwon passed by, always careful to keep its deadly claws retracted. These games reminded Jiwon of the cats he had grown up with on Earth, except this particular cat would eventually grow large enough to hunt spaceships. The Aurora's medical bay hummed with sophisticated equipment that could analyze the biology of over 300 known alien species. Dr. Han Daeho moved around Kai with practiced efficiency, his scanner glowing blue as it recorded the young Krythak's vital signs. What had started as a simple monthly checkup had turned into something far more significant as the readings revealed remarkable changes in the creature's neural development. "Brain activity is off the charts," Daeho muttered, adjusting his scanner's sensitivity. "Jiwon, look at these patterns. The language centers are developing at an accelerated rate, far beyond what we've seen in any other species." Kai lay perfectly still on the specially reinforced examination table, its golden eyes tracking every movement in the room. The young predator had grown considerably over the past month, now measuring nearly 3 meters from nose to tail tip. Its scales had deepened to an almost liquid black that seemed to absorb the medical bay's bright lighting. Chief Science Officer Cho Yuna stood near the viewing window, her tablet recording every detail of the examination. She had been studying Krythak physiology for over a decade, and the data they were collecting was rewriting everything the galactic scientific community thought they knew about the species. The neural pathways are forming connections that shouldn't be possible, Yuna observed, her voice filled with scientific excitement. It's as if the creature's brain is adapting specifically to process human communication patterns. Jiwon sat in a chair beside the examination table, one hand resting gently on Kai's massive flank. He could feel the steady rhythm of the creature's breathing, the warmth radiating through its armored hide. Over the weeks, this simple physical contact had become as natural as breathing for both of them. The medical scanner beeped softly as it completed its analysis of Kai's vocal cords. Daeho frowned at the readings, running the scan twice more to confirm what he was seeing. "This is extraordinary," he said, turning the scanner's display toward the others. "The vocal structure has modified itself. Look at these tissue formations. They're adapting to produce sounds outside the normal Krythak range." As if responding to their discussion, Kai lifted its massive head and fixed its gaze directly on Jiwon. The golden eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human in its depth and complexity. The creature's throat began to vibrate with a low, melodious sound that was unlike anything they had heard from it before. The room fell completely silent as everyone recognized what was happening. This wasn't one of Kai's usual growls or purrs. The young Krythak was attempting to form words, its modified vocal cords struggling to produce sounds that its species had never been designed to make. "Ah!" The first syllable emerged as a soft rumble, barely recognizable but unmistakably intentional. Jiwon leaned forward unconsciously, his heart racing as he realized what Kai was trying to say. The Korean word he used most often when speaking to the creature, the term of endearment that had become their private language, apa. The word came out perfectly formed, the Korean pronunciation flawless, despite emerging from an alien throat. The medical bay's sophisticated recording equipment captured every nuance of the sound, documenting the first time in galactic history that a Krythak had spoken in another species' language. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. The significance of what they had witnessed was almost too enormous to process. Deho's scanner slipped from his numb fingers, clattering against the floor in the sudden silence. "That's impossible," Yuna whispered, her scientific training warring with the evidence of her own eyes and ears. "Krythak young only develop parental bonds with their own species. They don't even have concepts for cross-species relationships." But Kai wasn't finished. The young predator's tail began to sway in a slow, contented rhythm that Ji-won had learned to recognize as a sign of happiness. Those golden eyes never left his face as the creature spoke again, this time with more confidence. "Appa," Kai repeated, and then added something that made Ji-won's breath catch in his throat. The creature was purring, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through the examination table and seemed to fill the entire medical bay with warmth. The emotional impact hit Ji-won like a physical blow. This magnificent, deadly creature, a being that would grow up to be one of the galaxy's most feared predators, had chosen him as its parent. Not just a caretaker or guardian, but something deeper and more profound than professional duty. "My God," Deho breathed, slowly retrieving his scanner from the floor. "It's not just mimicking sounds. Look at the brain scans. It's forming genuine, emotional associations with the word. This is real parental bonding." Ji-won reached out with trembling hands to stroke Kai's massive head, running his fingers along the smooth scales behind the creature's ears. The young Krythak leaned into the touch, its purring intensifying as it repeated the word that had changed everything between them. "Appa. Appa." The fierce protectiveness that surged through Ji-won's chest was unlike anything he had ever experienced. This wasn't the detached concern of a scientist for his research subject. This was the primal, overwhelming love that parents felt for their children, transcending species boundaries and defying every rule of evolutionary biology. Commander Park. Minho's voice crackled through the medical bay's communication system, requesting an update on the examination, but nobody moved to respond. They were all too busy witnessing something that would be talked about in xenobiological circles for centuries to come. Kai had chosen its family, and that family was human. The first warning came from the Aurora's long-range sensors at 0347 hours during the night cycle. Ji-won jolted awake in his quarters as the station's emergency klaxons pierced the darkness, their urgent wailing echoing through every corridor and compartment. Red emergency lighting bathed his room in an ominous glow as the AI's voice announced, "The crisis. Multiple unidentified vessels approaching from the outer rim. All personnel report to emergency stations." This is not a drill. Ji-won's first thought wasn't for his own safety or the research data that represented years of work. His mind immediately went to Kai, who would be confused and frightened by the chaos erupting around them. The young Krythak had never experienced anything like this before. He threw on his uniform and rushed through the corridors, pushing past panicked crew members who were heading in the opposite direction toward the evacuation pods. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows that danced across the walls, and he could hear the distant rumble of the station's defensive systems coming online. In the biolab, he found Kai pacing frantically in circles, the creature's scales shifting from their normal midnight black to a darker shade that seemed to absorb light completely. The young predator's golden eyes were wide with confusion and fear, and it was making distressed sounds that Ji-won had never heard before. "Appa," Kai called out when it saw him, rushing to the reinforced barrier that separated them. "Appa, what's happening?" Before Ji-won could answer, Security Chief Nam Hyun-woo burst into the lab, his face grim with determination. He was wearing full combat armor, and his energy rifle was already powered up and ready for action. "Ji-won, we need to evacuate now," Hyun-woo said urgently. These aren't ordinary pirates. They're Valdari raiders, the most vicious bunch in this sector. They've already taken out our outer defense platforms. Through the lab's reinforced windows, G1 could see the sleek, predatory shapes of the raider ships closing in on the Aurora. Their hulls were painted in the deep red colors of the Valdari clans, and their weapon systems were already charging for attack. Energy blasts began to light up the darkness of space as the station's automated defenses opened fire. The evacuation. Pods are launching from Bay 7, Yunwu continued, grabbing G1's arm. But we have to leave now. The containment systems will keep your creature safe until rescue arrives. G1 looked at Kai, who was pressing against the barrier with desperate intensity. The young Krythak could sense the danger, and its distressed calls were becoming more urgent by the second. The creature's tail was lashing back and forth, and its claws were extended, clear signs of extreme agitation. "I'm not leaving him," G1 said firmly, pulling free from Hyunwoo's grip. "Kai is family. I don't abandon family." "Are you insane?" Hyunwoo shouted over the sound of another explosion that shook the station. "That thing is a predator. It can take care of itself." But G1 was already at the containment controls, his fingers flying over the interface. The biolab's security systems were designed to keep dangerous creatures inside, but they could also be used to keep dangerous people out. With a few keystrokes, he activated the lab's emergency lockdown protocols. The massive blast doors sealed with a deep thrum of power, trapping them inside, but also creating a fortress that could withstand almost any assault. Hyunwoo pounded on, the reinforced barrier, shouting orders and threats, but G1 ignored him. He opened Kai's containment area and immediately found himself with an armful of terrified young predator. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered in Korean, stroking the creature's scales. "We're going to be fine. I'm not going anywhere." The station shuddered as the Valdari ships began their assault in earnest. Emergency power flickered on and off, and Jiwon could hear the distant sounds of combat as the station's security forces engaged the raiders. But here in the biolab, wrapped in Kai's protective embrace, he felt strangely calm. That calm was shattered when the lab's main entrance exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. 3 Valdari raiders stumbled through the smoke, their weapons raised and their faces hidden behind intimidating combat masks. They were tall reptilian beings with scaled skin and cruel yellow eyes that gleamed with predatory intelligence. "Well, well," the lead raider hissed, his voice distorted by his mask's voice modifier. "Looks like we found ourselves a human researcher, and his pet." The Valdari clans pay good money for exotic specimens, but as the raiders advanced into the lab, something extraordinary happened. Kai's scales began to change, darkening to a shade of black so deep it seemed to create a void in the emergency lighting. The young predator's golden eyes blazed with an intensity that made the raiders take an involuntary step backward. "Upper," Kai rumbled, positioning itself between G1 and the intruders. The creature's voice carried a note of deadly promise that had never been there before. "Mine." The lead raider laughed harshly and raised his plasma rifle. "Stupid animal. Time to learn some respect." The energy blast that followed would have been lethal to any normal creature. But Kai wasn't normal. The young Krythak's scales absorbed the plasma energy like a sponge, dispersing the heat harmlessly across its armored hide. For the first time, G1 witnessed the defensive capabilities that made adult Krythak so feared throughout the galaxy. What happened next was a masterpiece of controlled violence. Kai moved with fluid grace, its strikes precise and calculated. The raiders' weapons were useless against its natural armor, and their combat training meant nothing against millions of years of evolutionary perfection. But the most remarkable thing was the creature's restraint. Each blow was measured to disable rather than kill, each movement designed to protect rather than destroy. In less than 30 seconds, all 3 raiders were unconscious on the lab floor, their weapons scattered and their armor cracked, but their lives intact. Kai returned to G1's side, its scales gradually returning to their normal color as the immediate threat passed. "Good boy," G1 whispered, his voice shaking with adrenaline and pride. "You did so good." Kai's answering purr filled the lab with warmth as reinforcements finally arrived to secure the station. They had faced their first real test together, and their bond had proven stronger than any protocol or regulation. The transport ship that brought Elder Vexhar to the Aurora was unlike anything G1 had ever seen. The massive vessel stretched nearly a kilometer in length, its hull crafted from the same dark material as Krithak scales. Ancient symbols covered its surface, glowing with a soft amber light that pulsed like a heartbeat. This was a ship built by a civilization that had mastered space travel when humans were still learning to make fire. G1 stood in the Aurora's main docking bay, watching as the enormous craft settled into position with surprising grace. Beside him, Kai had grown into a magnificent specimen, nearly 5 meters long now, with scales that shimmered like liquid obsidian. The young Krithak's excitement was obvious in the way its tail swished and its golden eyes never left the approaching ship. "Nervous?" Commander Park Minho asked, joining them at the viewing window. 6 months of working with Kai had changed the commander's perspective on many things, but this meeting would determine the future of the most unusual family in galactic history. The airlock cycled open with a deep, resonant tone, and Elder Vexhar emerged into the docking bay. G1's breath caught in his throat. The ancient Krithak was massive even by the standards of the species, nearly 8 meters from nose to tail, with scales that had deepened to an almost metallic bronze with age. Intricate silver markings covered the elder's hide, each one representing decades of experience and wisdom. But what struck G1 most was the intelligence in those ancient amber eyes. This wasn't just a predator. This was a being who had lived for centuries, who had seen the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy. Kai moved forward hesitantly, making soft chirping sounds that G1 had learned were expressions of respect and greeting in Krithak culture. The reunion between Guardian and Youngling was touching to witness, two magnificent creatures acknowledging their bond, while an entire docking bay full of crew members watched in silent amazement. Vexhar's voice, when it came through the universal translator, was deep and melodious despite the electronic distortion. "Young one, you have grown strong, but you have also grown different." The elder's gaze shifted to G1, and for a moment the human felt like he was being examined by something far older and wiser than he could comprehend. Those ancient eyes seemed to see through him completely, weighing his character and finding him adequate. "So you are the human who has claimed kinship with my charge," Vexhar said, the translator struggling to convey the complex emotional undertones in the Krithak's speech. "I have studied your species files during my recovery. Humans are fascinating creatures, short-lived but passionate, weak individually but strong together." The next few hours were unlike anything in G1's experience. Vexhar spoke of Krithak culture, of bonds that transcended species and traditions that stretched back millions of years. The elder explained that among the Krithak, family was not defined by blood but by choice, by the willingness to protect and be protected, to hunt together and share the bounty. "In all my centuries of existence," Vexhar continued, settling into a resting position that still made the massive creature tower over everyone else, "I have never witnessed a bond like this. Kai speaks of you constantly, tells stories of your adventures together, your kindness during times of fear." The formal ceremony took place in the Aurora's main conference hall, with representatives from dozens of galactic species in attendance. News crews from across known space had arrived to document this unprecedented event. G1 stood beside Kai, wearing his best formal uniform, while trying not to think about the billions of beings watching the live broadcast. Vexhar performed the ancient ritual in the traditional Krithak manner, speaking words in a language so old that the universal translators struggled to interpret them. But the meaning was clear. G1 was being formally adopted into a Krithak family pod, becoming the first human in galactic history to achieve such an honor. "From this day forward," Vexhar declared in Standard Galactic for the benefit of the watching galaxy, "Kim G1 of Earth is recognized as true parent to Kai of the Shadow Scale pod. Their bond is sanctified by ancient law and cosmic tradition." The years that followed brought changes that rippled throughout the galaxy. The interspecies adoption program that G1 established became a model for cross-cultural cooperation. Dozens of unlikely family units formed, Centaurian children with human parents, Rigelian younglings bonding with Andromedan guardians, even a few brave souls adopting juvenile Valdari, despite their reputation as raiders. Kai grew into a legend among both species. The adult Krithak worked alongside Jiwon as an equal partner, their research into predator psychology revolutionizing the field of xenobiology. Together they solved conflicts between species that had seemed impossible to resolve, proving that understanding could bridge any gap. The most rewarding moments came during quiet times in their shared laboratory. Jiwon would look up from his research to find Kai carefully organizing specimens or operating delicate equipment with surprising gentleness. The sight never failed to fill him with pride and wonder. "People ask me all the time how this works," Jiwon said during one of their frequent interviews with Galactic media. Kai lay curled nearby, one massive eye open and watching protectively. "They want to know the secret to forming bonds across species lines." He reached out to scratch behind Kai's ear ridges, earning the deep purr that had become their signature sound. The galaxy's most feared predator leaned into the touch like a contented house cat, completely relaxed in the presence of its chosen parent. "The secret is simple," Jiwon continued, his voice warm with affection. "Love doesn't care about DNA or evolution or what planet you come from. It only cares about the heart and whether you're willing to open it to someone who might look different, but feels exactly the same inside." Kai's rumbling purr filled the laboratory, a sound of perfect contentment that spoke louder than any words about the power of family chosen rather than inherited. The end.